So what we've covered so far, let me just quickly summarize. I know that you've done Unit 1 and Unit 3.31 and Unit 3.32, but it'll give us a bit of a context just to understand why these units have been done. Let me just quickly arrange. So we have got 3.31, 3.32, and then we've got 3.34, which is the third unit, but there's a bit of a numbering issue with ATHE, but leave that. Now, in the first unit, what you've done is you understood, why businesses, why there is a business environment. That means businesses, organizations, or, primarily companies, how do they form the business environment? Here, the main aspect that you've learned in the unit has been to understand how businesses operate, why businesses need to be registered. We've looked at certain things like internal and external factors which affect businesses. So when you are working within a particular sector, if you look at, say, in the UK now, there's a Brexit happening. There are 16 different sectors in the UK in terms of manufacturing, production, railways, defense. These are all different sectors. You look at tourism. All these sectors are affected by Brexit. So these are things which are beyond the control of the business, and they are called external factors which can affect the operations of a business, because these include things like, we've done a bit of analysis in Unit 1 with the help of PESTLE, which stands for, factors which can affect the business politically, economically, socially, technologically, legally, and also, environmentally. Now, in the first unit, the main idea was to understand business, what is business, how businesses operate, how they're affected by internal and external environment in which they function. So if a business is registered in the UK and it's currently being affected by the uncertain economic climate of Brexit, all businesses are affected in some way or the other. Some of them are directly affected because it affects import and export. Some of them could be indirectly affected because they work as suppliers or in the ancillary sector to be able to support the large companies or large organizations which work within the sector. We also looked at in that unit to understand, the key elements of marketing. So there's a bit of, business environment and a bit of marketing in that. So understanding, marketing mix, looking at marketing plans, segmentation, primary and secondary research, and how companies market their products and services. We also looked at advantages of understanding why individuals need to behave and follow ethical practices when they work within a company. So companies, when they make large profits but do not pay their fair share of tax, we looked at some of the ethical considerations, corporate social responsibilities, which was in Learning Outcome 4. And then towards the end, we looked at, things like how does the culture and structure of the organization affect the business, or how does it affect what kind of, image the organization actually portrays outwards. So when you look at Japanese organizations in particular, they seem to be quite hierarchical. So if the people working in the front line do not have access to the top management, but when you look at most American companies, they have flat structures, they have functional structures. So the idea was to understand how the structure of the organization, the way it functions, affects the overall image of the organization. In Unit 2, we basically understood resources. Now, there are different types of resources. You have human resources, financial resources, infrastructure resources, administrative resources, but all the resources are required to run a business. Now, there are different types of resources, technological resources, for example, which have become more important in today's context, because this is something which most organizations are using to, further and advance their business. As the organizations have become global, they have multinational operations. That means they have operations in different countries. The role of human resources is becoming quite important, and the monitoring of these resources has become paramount importance. Reason being that when you look at human resource, this is one resource which is able to control all resources. So if you have, say, a lot of, if you work within a manufacturing company, what you will see is that the manufacturing or the production company, engineering companies use a lot of tools and techniques. So they use a lot of tools like cranes, a lot of other types of equipment which is required to move, things around on a construction site. But who works on these tools and equipment? It's the human resource which works on that. So in Unit 2, the focus is primarily to understand how resources can be effectively utilized to achieve success for the business. That means to increase profitability, to increase efficiency, to get more productivity. And in the tasks that you've done, We've also looked at some of the things on the way to understand how resources can be managed. One of the key principles which have come up over the years is project management, because a lot of companies now embark on something called small scale activities. When you launch a product, it's a small scale project because you will launch the product as a company for 1 to 3 locations, or maybe in across 2 or 3 weeks. But once that product launch is done and the project starts to create traction in terms of sales, customers are attracted, the teams which are created to launch that particular product gets disbanded and they go back to their own individual departments to do work. So here the importance was to understand and give you a bit of introduction into why project management is important, because a lot of small activities, tasks which organizations do today, they break them into something called projects. And project methodology, in order to do something in order to consider and do something, project methodology allows you to break the set of activities down into a series of steps which can be monitored, risks can be evaluated, and pros and cons can be looked at to ensure that it becomes a success. So a simple thing could be you're relocating an office, you're doing a construction, as the activity of Gary's Garage basically mentions. It's a small term, it's a short time it's an activity which is to be done over a short point of time. Once the construction of the garage is achieved, the project will also be, it's like a small mini project which will also be coming to an end. So because there are a number of activities to be done, the idea here is to give you an insight into how companies sometimes look at managing, large, say for example, when they look at managing, big goals, they break it down into certain set of small activities and they manage it or project manage it to ensure that the success is achieved when this is done. So in terms of managing resources, you understood key things to understand how management of resources is done in the first part. Then we looked at some techniques which are used to evaluate management of resources, which could be things like performance appraisals, benchmarking. You also looked at project management, impact of technology, why technology is making things easier and quicker to be able to be done when you're doing certain things. So when you look at the olden days, people did not have access to cranes and some of the other things on the construction site. So construction took a number of years to complete. But nowadays you see large skyscrapers being built quite quickly because technology has enabled machines which can be used to move resources, and that's why the short, as in this example, the time to construct a building or a skyscraper has been significantly reduced. The other things that you looked at, which is important when you manage resources at some point in time, is because after the post-World War II era, a lot of industrialization has taken place. People have started to work within factories, production, facilities, engineering facilities, and what has happened after that is that because of mass industrialization, the companies are producing goods in great quantity, and when production happens in large quantities, quality becomes important because you're looking at failure of products, or you're looking at the key aspects of why products fail, and that is where a lot of systems got invented anywhere between 1940s to up until 1990s. So you see, the ISO came about first. Then you had, for example, total quality management, continuous improvement, the PDCA cycle which came across. You look at Kaizen, Six Sigma. These are techniques which have been invented over the years in order to ensure that the products and services which the customers are demanding adhere to certain sort of quality. So in Unit 2, we looked at basically understanding resources, types of resources, how they are influenced by the use of technology, and then when we look at managing these resources, how do we look at certain techniques to understand to maximize performance, to look at maintaining quality, and how these concepts of quality are helping the organizations cater to the increased demand or the complexity of demand from customers. Now, in the third unit, the reason of summarizing this was that there is a bit of a pattern or a learning journey which ATHE is taking you through in this particular course. And in the third unit, what we are looking at basically now doing is understanding, the resource, which is human resource, and their management within an organization. So how do we look at, primarily managing the most important resource? Human resource is now considered the most important resource in the 21st century. And if you have good people with good skills, attributes, and knowledge working for you within the organization, you generally see that the organization is more productive, more efficient, and is able to achieve more. So the focus on studying this unit, managing people in organization, is to look at gaining understanding into how you look at management of human resources from the time of recruitment and selection. So it starts off by bringing new employees into the organization. And when you look at the process of recruitment and selection, we'll start from there. We'll go into a bit of performance management, some parts of which would be to look at performance appraisal, looking at, the 360-degree feedback, the 180-degree feedback that you covered earlier. We will also look at maybe covering something called a balanced scorecard technique, which was proposed by Richard Norton, in the early 1950s. And that is something which is management by objective, which we've covered earlier. Those are techniques, which are used to benchmark the performance of resources within organizations. So here, this unit is primarily going to be focused on something related to human resources and how the management and development of human resources is required within the organization to, make sure that the organization is able to achieve the goals and objectives. So we'll start off with learning outcome 1, and I've got a few presentations because this particular unit has about 7 learning outcomes. So there are 6 or 7 presentations to cover all the learning outcomes. The first one focuses on something which is related to the process of recruitment and selection. Now, can I just quickly, ask you one quick question? When you look at the functions of human resources, HR in particular, have you come across, the various functions of human resources?
Yeah. Okay,
what do you think are the functions which a HR manager actually performs when he works within an organization? Can you name a few? Anything that comes to your mind. If you work, just wear a hat of the HR manager. Assume that you are a human resources manager working for a company. And what do you think you would do on a day-to-day basis when you work within the human resources department?
Oh, I don't know now.
Right, okay. Okay, let me give you a hint. So assuming that I work within, work as an HR manager in an organization, one of my key things that I do on a daily basis would be to look after, staffing. And, look after, when I say staffing, that means recruiting employees, selecting employees or, new employees for a particular role. The second function that I could look at would be, which I can think of that I do on a daily basis, would be, say, things like training. When I am required to train employees within the organization. Other functions that I could think of would be HR managers are primarily responsible for, looking after, the pay packages, looking after, your perks and incentives which you get along with when you work in an organization, when you work and get a contract. So if you work within an organization, you sign a contract, you become an employee. And when you do the work on a monthly basis, at the end of the month, you get wages or you get salary. And that salary, towards the end of the year, if you performed well, met all your objectives, you get incentives or bonuses or holiday trips or things like that. And that is what also is managed by, HR. Now, other things that I look at, would be including things which is to look at sometimes managing employee relations. If there's a conflict or a fight which erupts between different employees and things like that, the HR manager has to step in to kind of diffuse that situation. And for that, they have certain policies in terms of, the employee handbook and looking at, things like how to maintain cordial or, amicable employee relations. In large organizations, I would suggest you would also have something called a union department. So within HR, there'll be an HR manager who looks after payroll, looks after contracts. There'll be somebody who looks after training and development. There's somebody who looks after employee relations. There could be somebody who also looks after just recruitment and selections. As they say sometimes that I'm a recruiter, that means that person's responsibility is to, put out a job advert, speak to the heads of department, look at identifying vacancies. And, once the shortlisting starts, they bring the student, I would say the candidates in, and then the candidates are interviewed by looking at the CV. You're looking at maybe in some cases organizations also look at doing some tests or evaluation tests. And then once you've done that, you basically bring the person in, issue a contract, and start the people start working. So when we look at all this function, of what the human resources manager does, to summarize, they basically look at workforce planning or recruiting and selection. They look at things like rewards, incentives. They look at payroll. They look at employee relations. They look at training and development. These are in general the functions of HR department. And large companies, you will see, will have a lot of people working within the department because they have individual roles to function on, or they are specialists in that role. But in a small organization, sometimes you will see that one person who's the HR manager looks after everything. He also does the payroll towards the month end. He will also, or maybe just do the processing of the employee wages, and then the payroll is done by accounts. They might also be involved in recruitment, selection, things like that. So these key functions that we look at of the HR department are going to be studied in this particular unit. One of the other things which you see the HR also does towards the end of the year is sit with you, if it's a small organization, to do your appraisal, to do your performance appraisal. If it's a big organization, that person might be sitting with the department head or your manager, and they, along with the department head or the manager, along with you, and the HR manager will be actually looking at doing your performance appraisal, how you perform on these set of roles and responsibilities given for the year, and basis that your evaluation will be done using a performance appraisal. So all these activities that we look at are going to be actually studied in this particular unit, and each of the learning outcome will basically focus on one particular role of what the HR department does. In the first one, we are going to be studying one of the main activities which a HR person does, or somebody who works as a human resources manager does, is to understand the process of how recruitment and selection is done within an organization. Is that okay? Mm-hmm. And let's look at briefly the few slides. Some of these slides are quite detailed, but I'm just going to give you some idea. Now, if you look at how does the process of recruitment start in the organization, in a business, in a company that you work, in a company that you are working yourself, how do you think the process of recruitment starts? Can you think of a way in terms of how this process actually gets started?
What, the CV application?
Absolutely brilliant. So the first thing what happens is, you see in organizations is sometimes the companies would put out a job advert on the website, and on the website, because the job advert has been put out, you start to get CVs which come through via email or through the website, wherein people start applying for these jobs. Correct? Now, apart from that, if I just take one step backwards, you will see that, okay, if you're working within a company, sometimes what will happen is during the start of the year, when the annual planning is done, the various people who are managers or department heads are asked to look at giving some sort of a plan for recruitment. That means, do you have any requirements which will be coming up this year in terms of resources that you would need? And that would mean that they were asking you a direct question that, are you looking at recruiting people within your department? Because if you work within a sales department or a sales and marketing department, and this year the target given to you by the CEO is that you need to look at increasing sales by 50%, then at some stage the head of department or head of marketing would also look at that if I have to increase sales by 50%, it would need maybe some additional manpower or additional person to come in and join the company who would help me achieving that target. So when that idea of annual planning starts, they are asked to prepare some sort of a plan for what you call the resources requirement. And in that requirement, the department head or the manager would say that, okay, I'm looking at recruiting a sales manager who would expect you to start, say, by 1st of April, and we would need this manager working at this level, we will have this salary and things like that. That requirement is sent off to the human resources manager, and then the human resources manager creates something called a job description. The job description, job advert, which is then placed on the website or given out into the newspapers, basis which they start getting applications or CVs through the email oblique in the post. Would you agree with that?
Yep.
Yeah. So this process starts off by, if I have to put it this way, starts off by looking at the creation of a job advert, the job advert leading to some sort of a detailed job description, because when the HR department looks at saying, okay, if we are going to appoint a sales manager, they will create a job description. Job description say the grade of the person coming into the organization, what salary he would get, and what are the key activities the person is expected to perform. So in that, they will list out things like what is the minimum requirement. Would you want somebody with a degree holder, like 2-1 with a bachelor's degree, minimum 5 years of experience? So what they will do is in the job description, they will create something which is to do with minimum mandatory requirements. And then they will say optional requirements which the candidate could meet. And then towards the end, the HR manager would create certain keywords which are required that they are going to search for in the CVs. Things like prior experience, things like working experience or working with, say, if I'm looking at a sales and marketing manager job, working within a retail organization or an FMCG organization, having achieved 100% target is a keyword. Be able to work independently is a keyword. Have networking experience, have experience of working with partners or channel, partners in the market, working with retail outlets in the market. So these are keywords that they will also phrase, which they will start to look at when they start getting CVs or application forms. And the HR person normally does a key search in the CVs to see these words. So if these words are present, then sometimes you get shortlisted and they look at the CV in a bit more detail. And the HR person would then pass a copy of that CV to the department head or the department which has placed the vacancy or requirement for that vacancy. Is that something that you've heard or have at least seen in terms of how it happens?
Sorry?
Have you seen or heard about this, how the recruitment happens?
No.
Okay. So here, what I would suggest is if I just practically look at, if I go to, say, a particular website like CV Library, the first thing that we look at is if I go into this and I say that I am looking at searching for a job, say as a marketing manager, and you type the postcode, say location, and then you say a minimum salary of say 30,000, and then your per annum, and then find jobs. So when we try and find a job, here if you see this particular job description, which has been created even before the process of selection or recruitment actually starts. So this process of job description and its creation in terms of what kind of a role is there in the organization, what are the key responsibilities the person will come in and perform. They give a bit of a background about the company, things like what benefits that the role will attract, things like salary, incentives, car, mobile allowances, and things like that. What kind of person they are looking at with key skills and qualities in the marketing manager. Now, these kind of things which you see is a job advert, but is created from something called a detailed job description, which is prepared even before the process of recruitment and selection starts. Is that clear?
Is that something I would need to do?
It will be something that you will need to look at, yes. But you will probably just look at putting in a bit of a screenshot by using a particular website. And here in task 2, if you see, it talks about prepare job description and person specification for a specified job. Can you see that?
Yeah.
So this bit, if you take a screenshot of this and then put it as an evidence to explain that this is how the process of job description is or a job advert is done, that will help you address the task 1.2 clearly. So this is the process which actually starts even before you start receiving the CVs. If the company does not put out a job advert or a vacancy requirement in the newspaper, on the website, on their on any other job portal, you would not see the process of recruitment and selection actually starting. If people do not apply, how would you get CVs? How would you get people applying to you without having to see a job advert? Isn't it?
Yeah.
So the first task talks about explaining the process of job, recruitment and selection. And recruitment and selection starts off with the process of a job advert. After the job advert has been placed, you start receiving what you call CVs. Now, what are the various methods to which recruitment can be done? If I look at explaining very briefly without going into the slides, maybe that will be easier. So how does the process of recruitment happen within an organization? So one is you get CVs or resumes, as you say, resume via email or post, correct? The other way that you could also invite potential candidates to come in and apply for a position or a vacancy in the organization would be through referrals, correct? Sometimes you see in organization what happens is that if they place a job advert, but they also place a job advert on the intranet or within the company, company network. Now this is where they say if you refer a friend and he or she actually ends up joins the company, then what you get is a bit of a referral fees, isn't it? Correct? So sometimes when you look at, when you are looking at companies, they are also looking at getting employee referrals to get new people to be recruited within the organization. Now, the other ways that they look at is sometimes you look at recruiting from competitors. That means you want to, most HR managers, what they do is they keep track of performing people within an organization. And when I say within an organization, these are generally competitor organizations. So when I look at example, if I look at, say, Virgin Media, Sky and Virgin are competitors, isn't it? So Sky is, for example, they provide Sky TV and, broadband and other things. Virgin also provides channels through the cable network and also have broadband, which is fiber. So these two companies are fierce competitors. And the third competitor that they look at is BT now, because BT owns E and they also own BT Sports. So what they are doing is they are competitors on broadband, PV is broadband, TV, and cable. All the three companies. So sometimes what you do is rather than look at, employing or, basically doing the adverts and selection process, what HR managers also do is they keep track of performing people or employees within an organization, and they sometimes also, I'll use a term called poach. Sometimes you poach a sales manager from a different organization. That means you entice that person to join the company by offering higher salary, promotion, or more responsibility. So this makes the whole process of recruitment selection a bit easier, because what they try and do is that, okay, you're a performing manager, you're looking for a change. Person also is looking at that within the organization, I might not get a promotion, but if I switch jobs from my company to another competitor company, I might get a better salary, higher promotion, a promotion or higher salary, and that could happen in a very short point in time. So they try and approach the people that they know within the organization, put their CV in order for them to be, recruited within the organization. Correct? Yeah. Now, when you look at recruitment, there are different types. You could recruit, companies can recruit directly, and that when you say directly could be from websites, or they place advertisements, recruitment advertisement, right? They could also, involve what you call recruitment sites or consultants, correct? So if a company has to recruit, they normally go back to their hired or retained consultant, and that consultant will do that basic bit of creating the job description, understanding what is the salary structure, and then what they will do is design an advert, they'll put it on their site, start gathering CVs, and when the CV starts coming into the consultants, they will then start shortlisting those CVs, and the shortlisted ones will go to the HR manager. Is that okay? So when we look at the process of recruitment, as you can see, can happen through so many different ways. You can have, you can post an advert on your website and people can apply directly. You can look at referrals, which means employee gets employees. That means if you refer a friend or somebody that you know who is interested in joining, and sometimes that would mean that the employee gets a referral fees and the employer saves the whole hassle of going through the process of recruitment and selection. Sometimes HR managers also get, people to, join the company, but they are primarily working in competitors. And sometimes that concept also works. And this concept allows also the process of recruitment and selection to be shortened. Because let's face it, when an HR manager has to recruit somebody, you go through the whole rigmarole of what, you will start off with, create a job advert, put it out, wait for 21 days, get a lot of CVs, go through all the CVs, shortlist them, then bring them for interview. After the interview, you have multiple stages of interviews in most companies, first round, second round. In the third round, you basically also sometimes, if you're recruiting for higher positions, you will also ask them to go through certain tests, or, you will basically give them situations, discussions. Once that happens, you give out an acceptance letter. They accept the offer. There's a bit of negotiation which happens on the salary packages and things like that. Once that is done, you issue an employment contract. The person joins the organization. You take them through the process of induction, which would mean that they understand policies, processes of the organization. They go through basic requirements of the role. And then at that stage, they will then be on a probation for 3 months, 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, depending on the role and the position in the organization. Once they are past that period of probation, the employee then becomes a permanent employee. Until such time, the HR department continues to monitor that process of recruitment and selection, because that person has not become the employee of the organization until that person or he or she actually finishes or completes the probation period. Is that okay?
Yep.
So when you look at this whole process, sometimes in order to do this, it takes 3 months, 6 months. By the time probation is over, could be a year as well in some cases. So sometimes when you look at the process of recruitment and selection, HR managers go through this process of, also recruiting people within the company.
Yep.
Okay. Now, in the first learning outcome, what we are looking at is, apart from understanding the process of recruitment and selection, we also want to understand the key legislation, which is the minimum requirements. Like, as a company, as a business, you cannot employ somebody below a minimum wage, which is what, $8.50 an hour, currently. That means the HR department has to follow what is called the legislation and labor laws when they recruit and select people to work within an organization. Now, some of the laws, which would be laws like, you look at Data Protection Act, which has now become GDPR, in May 2015,
Okay.
right? Then you look at something which is very important, which is Equality and Diversity Act, right? Because they cannot discriminate. A simple example would be here when I look at, but if I say I want to recruit, we are looking at recruiting, say, for example, a receptionist. And if I specify in the job advert that we are looking only to recruit a female, or only applications are invited only from, female candidates, that means we are basically being discriminatory. We cannot discriminate, so there's a discrimination law or act which needs to be looked at, because we sometimes, when you advertise, the HR managers have to be very clear that they cannot say things like, we will not want somebody who's disabled, we will not want somebody who is going on maternity leave. These are things which are considered discrimination. So you're not doing a free and fair process of recruitment. So in this particular learning outcome, what we also need to be able to do is differentiate between certain types of first we need to understand key legislation and labor law in the context of UK in particular, UK market in particular, and then we need to look at 1 or 2 specific laws which are directly related to what is called, recruitment and selection. So what are these direct laws which are related to recruitment and selection? And if the company breaches these laws, then the companies can be, sued. They can be fined, and the regulator can actually look at, taking legal action against an organization. So some of the minimum laws that we have to look at, and this is for the merit activity, in terms of understanding what are the various key legislation that we need to look at, is the Minimum Wage Act. We need to look at Data Protection, Equality and Diversity, and we need to look at Discrimination Act. Now, these are various legislations that the HR person needs to be aware of when they put out a job advert. So if we go back to this job advert here, as you can see, they would have mentioned things like which are generic. They cannot specify that we want only male people applying, or people with only 10 years of experience can apply, or people with certain qualities and aspects can apply. So you cannot go into personal aspects, but professionally, the companies can put out a job advert which will say we need this many years of experience. We want experience on working on these kind of software packages, and those kind of things. But they cannot specify that we only want male candidates. We do not want disabled candidates to apply, or things like that. That would mean direct discrimination in the case of putting out a job advert, and in that case, the company can be fined or sued by the regulator in the industry under the labor laws. And that is what we need to clearly understand. In the distinction activity, what we have to do is take up a particular job advert, and we have to look at what is the effect and what legislation they have followed in that job advert, and we can relate it to the types of laws that we want to study. Is that okay? So is that good enough in terms of understanding learning outcome 1? Rather than go through a lot of presentation, what we've done is we've discussed this a bit more practically. And the idea here is to cover some of these things. So details are given in the slides. If you briefly go through them quite quickly, you'll be able to understand. But what we want to do in learning outcome 1 is understand recruitment and selection as a process. In that process, we want to understand how recruitment selection can take place, various types, and then what are the key legislation that the HR managers have to follow when they look at this process of recruitment and selection. Okay. So what I've done is I've grouped some of these slides into tasks 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and they basically cover the learning outcome 1 in detail. Okay?
Yeah.
Any questions that you're in so far?
No, all right. Just if you can email me with the previous tasks, whatever needs to be completed. So
that's fine. So I'll send this across to you. I'll save this. I'm going to send this across to you now, so that you have a basic gist of what we've discussed today in Unit 3. And then you have the access to the presentation, which is on Moodle. I just go back here. So if you see this particular result, we just put the yellow box, which is to show that this is the unit now we've started. So this unit in particular, and that is LO1 that is being downloaded, and I've opened that up on this side. This is learning outcome 1.
Okay.
So you've got 1, 2, 3. There are 7 learning outcomes, so there are 7 presentations to cover this particular topic. And what I'm going to do is add on. I've added some clear handouts. One is methods of recruitment and selection. This is something which is going to be quite useful because it is directly related. To just close the presentation for a minute. It says explain the methods of recruitment and selection used by organization. If I look at this particular method in particular, in specific, just give me 1 second, and I will go to 3.3, save that here, and I will quickly open that up, because these are 2 specific, tasks which will, for which I've provided a bit of a handout, which will allow you to understand, the whole process of, recruitment and selection. So Dun & Bradstreet is basically an organization which works for Tesco. It's a big recruitment organization. And what I've done is basically summarize the processes of recruitment and selection here. So interviewing, candidate selection, third-party sourcing, external sourcing, internal sourcing, and then using, websites. Okay. And then the other one that we have is types of discrimination, which is focused on the merit and the distinction activity. So here the idea is what is the difference between indirect and direct discrimination. So when we say indirect discrimination, we are looking at primarily talking about, personal aspects which should not be included in a job advert. And these could be things like race, caste, color, creed, religion. And if they are included in the job advert, saying that I only want a Christian to apply, or only want a Muslim to apply, or only want a particular type of, race to apply, then you are doing an indirect discrimination in the job advert.
Right.
As far as discrimination is things which I mentioned earlier, things like mention of maternity leave, if you want only female employees to apply, or you want only a male employee to, males to apply for an job advert, then this is direct discrimination because you're not allowing the others to even apply for the job. So this is a bit of a handout which is specific to explaining what is called the indirect and direct discrimination.
Okay.
So if you read these two handouts, they will primarily help you in covering task 1.1, 1.1 merit, and 1D1, which is the distinction. Now, the second task, which is primarily prepare a job advert description and specification, is something that you need to do primarily from a job portal or a job advert that you see on any of the portals.
Okay.
You can go to read jobs, you can go to total jobs, you can go to any sort of a job portal that and from there pick up a job advert, and that would give you the description of the job, about the company, what kind of skills and attributes does a job ask for in a particular person.
Yeah.
Right? And then when you look at guideline 1.3, it basically talks about what are the guidelines which interviewers look at. So if I look at interview guidelines, there's a guide which I'll upload, which I have just to give you interview guidelines. So sometimes what happens is when you look at companies allowing candidates to come in for interviews, what tends to happen is they also give out something called interview guidelines. So these guidelines are given that, okay, directions to the office, we have disabled access, when you come in, please register at the reception, and then they also put out certain key aspects of what is expected, what is going to be the whole process of interview, that you will be first meeting with the HR manager, then the second interview will happen with the department head, and then the third interview will happen wherein you'll be asked to undertake a situation or a test or a group discussion. So these guidelines, sometimes you will see companies publish on their website. And these are guidelines which primarily are published because they want the candidates to be aware of the whole interview process. And that is what are to be referenced or mentioned in what you call task 1.3. So what I'm going to do is, just after this session right now, I'm going to send you a quick email which will have these two handouts I've showed you. The third handout which I will include will be interview guidelines, and they will be directly related to your learning outcome one, and I'll upload that here also. Okay? Good stuff. Now, when do we meet next? Are we meeting on Wednesday?
Yeah.
Okay, Wednesday 10:30?
Yes.
Okay, that's brilliant. So if you have any questions or any queries in the meanwhile, just drop me a quick email, and you can email that to me at raman@ukversity.co.uk, or you can send it to LearnerWork, whichever is convenient. And what I will do is I will come back to you pretty much straight away, either with some sort of detailed answer or a bit of a handout for you to read if you have any questions related to that. Okay? Good stuff. So if there are no more questions, I'm going to try and end the session and send you this email just after this, so that you're able to get on with learning outcome one. Okay. Thank you, Alexandra. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.